Welcome to the first ever episode of Sidewalk Skyline. I'm your host, Kevin Rogers, and I've lived most of my life in Canadian cities. Well, at least in Ontario cities. In this podcast, we're going to feature men and women from across Canada doing some extraordinary work in the places they live. So where am I from? I live in Windsor, Ontario, where the church I planted is celebrating 26 years of loving our neighbors, especially those living on the margins of society. Today's pilot episode is an interview with Roger Fordham, director of Feeding Windsor. If I didn't have the privilege of working alongside Roger, I would still think this is a great place to start our investigation of what God is up to in Canadian cities. In 5 years, this outreach has had a meteoric rise to 200,000 meal servings for the upcoming year. You're going to hear how a small church can partner with others to make a large dent in the city through hospitality. Let's go right to my interview now with Roger Fordham, director of Feeding Windsor. So Roger, tell me about how you ended up in Windsor. You went from being primarily a businessman to a bit of a social work maven. And so your work history before you began into more of a social focus. Tell us about that.
Well, I had a pretty broad base of experience. I did some sales work and sales training for about 10 years and have owned different businesses over the years. But almost about 30 years ago now, I came to Windsor, and I had been operating a blues bar down in the Kitchener area. Mm-hmm. And
what was it called?
I Popped the Gator.
Okay.
And so I just had gone through a divorce, and my wife and son had moved back to Windsor. I wasn't seeing my son, and I just realized I didn't have much chance of a relationship with him. Mm-hmm. Weekends were always my busiest time, and it was one of those days where I just had enough of the bar business and had a chance to go, and I came back to Windsor, and then I just started working here, just regular cooking jobs and different things like that. And over the years here, I've had businesses off and on, and then about 10 years ago, I answered an ad for the downtown mission as a food supervisor, and that's kind of when everything took a crazy turn.
Yeah, that's when you began to look at how your work could have an effect on improving people's lives. Is that?
Well, I guess that would be the nice way of saying it, but the reality is that it really took me down a road of really self-analyzing, because I was kind of I was kind of born and raised and of the belief that, people just need to try harder or pull up their socks, and I'm nothing special, and I work 12 hours a day and I can make it work. Everyone could.
Why can't anybody else?
Yeah. And really, I just was ignorant. I just didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I was really geared. I don't even know why I was looking in the paper that day. I was already working, and I seen that ad for the downtown mission, and I put a resume in, and they never called me for about 2 weeks. So I couldn't believe they didn't call me. And I actually called them and said, well, I'm thinking of going working somewhere else. And Barry Furlonger said, no, come on in. We want to have an interview with you. And I ended up working there. And it was in those times, several things. One of the huge things that I got to do as a food supervisor was almost every day I worked with a different group of people. Mm-hmm. And we got to talk about poverty, and we'd be making a meal. We were feeding about 225 people for lunch, and one day it'd be students, another day it'd be lawyers, another day it'd be union workers, another day it'd be teachers. So I really got to see a whole cross-section of the community. And over the years, it just made me realize that all the things I thought were black and white is really everything's gray. Mm. And it just isn't pull up your socks, and it just isn't you can do better. Or the reality is some people just don't have the opportunity, and some people prosper and some people fail sometimes simply by where God put them when they were born. So, it really made me look at things and try to understand poverty from a different lens. And that took me the 10, 11 years now
Yeah.
that's gone by, yeah.
Yeah. So, about 5 years ago, you left the job at the downtown mission as you were the main
And the food supervisor.
food
Yep,
supervisor,
yep.
and you began something at a Presbyterian church down the street from the mission, St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church,
Right.
and you began what has become Feeding Windsor.
Right.
Talk to me about how you made that transition over to St. Andrews. How did that happen? And Ron Sharp, who was the pastor at that time.
Yeah, the Reverend, yeah.
So talk about just the odd series of events that led to the beginnings of Feeding Windsor.
Well, two parishioners of St. Andrews, John Buttons and Sarah, were doing a food ministry at St. Andrews, and was near the end of what they could do with that ministry. They were running on volunteers, they were running on short money, and they had came down to see what I could do at the downtown mission to help them. Is there anything I could do to help support them? And about a week later, I realized, yeah, you know what, I'm going to walk down there and talk to them. That's what I'm going to do. And I left the mission, and I went down and talked to them, and I thought I'm going to talk to Reverend Sharp and see if there was a way I could use the kitchen, and we just start feeding people in the downtown core. And he was actually away at the time on a prayer retreat. And when he got back, they arranged a meeting with me, and it was funny because I just walked in his office, never met him before. He didn't know me from, anybody, and sat at his desk and told him what I felt I wanted to do. And he says, well, I have to meet with my wardens, and I actually have a meeting tomorrow, which was a Thursday. And the wardens are like the board of directors for a Presbyterian church. He called me back Friday. He says, yeah, come, pick up the keys. We'll give you the alarm code, and off you go. So I couldn't believe how easy it was, And so I just started buying groceries and going in and cooking a meal on Tuesday and giving it away and coming back on Thursday. So some more bags of groceries, cooking a meal and giving it away. And we were feeding about 75, sometimes as high as 100 people a meal.
Yeah.
And I don't know how good that was for a plan for sustainability, but it was the best plan I had.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. And gradually people would come and say, hey, you're here on Tuesdays, do you mind if I drop by and give you a hand? And next thing I knew, I had 4 or 5 volunteers helping putting the meal on. And once in a while someone would say, here's a grocery card, when you go grocery shopping,
Mm-hmm.
and then it started like that. And we decided to call it the Community Meals Project, because just to give it a try. And we recruited Ambassador Baptist Church in also, and they did the Wednesdays. And those were the 2 main community partners right from day one. And both churches, although St. Andrews closed about a year later, the group that bought, the congregation that bought that church continued on with the Feeding Windsor meal there. So it's they've been in since day one.
So the closing of St. Andrews was unique, and that's kind of where we began to connect and what brought us together. New Song Church had a history of doing something similar, a community meal and lunch program, breakfast program, done things like that for about 20 years. And so we had some conversations saying, what's happening to Feeding Windsor when St. Andrews closes? And, the steps were ordered that you came and brought Feeding Windsor as an outreach ministry under the banner of New Song Church. And we believed in what you were doing so much that we said, let's take your brand name that you were creating, Feeding Windsor, and let that also describe what we're doing here, and so that there would be a a continuity about what we were doing. So over a 5-year period, and by the way, anybody listening to this podcast, if you go on the web to feedingwindsor.ca, you can get a great overview of the different kind of activities that Feeding Windsor is doing, as well as you can donate online. So let's talk about some of the activities of Feeding Windsor. And but before we get into that, I just want you to grind your axe a little bit. And we've had some conversations about poverty in Canada.
Right.
Why do we have poverty in Canada, Roger? What's going on?
Well, that's something I really looked into because it kind of fascinated me that, if you measure us by GDP, we're the 12th largest economy in the world. If you use PPP ratios or methodology, then we're the 17th largest country in the world.
What PPP
is purchase power parity. So that comes out with a different gross. In our case, it's a rare where it is very similar. It's like $16 billion GDP at $17.3 billion or $1 trillion economy if it's PPP.
Trillion, yeah.
But a lot of countries, there's a lot of separation there.
So we do very well.
We do very well. We're in the top 10% of the countries in the world. And so it fascinated me that capitalist society is one of the things we usually can do well is money things. Mm-hmm. So then it made me realize that, so then if we could fix this problem, then obviously we have it because we're willing to accept it. Mm. And we keep it at a level that we're willing to accept. If people were dying of hunger on the streets and children were walking around with bloated bellies and crying, there isn't a Canadian that would accept that. Hmm. But we will accept that 1 out of 7 people live in poverty in this country.
Right.
And if you're a native Canadian, or if you're a single mom, parented a family, or if you're maybe living with a disability, that you might be 26, 35, 45% of living in poverty. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that really kind of made me think, and because all the values that we hold as Canadians are something that everywhere in the world looks at Canada and looks at us because of our values and because of who we are. But those values are only important and really values if all Canadians have those things. Yeah. So, and if you don't value your values, at some point they become valueless. So I thought that's kind of not a badge of honor that Canada carries, because I understand why the Sudan has poverty. I understand why some South American countries that have earthquakes every year and are ran by regimes have poverty. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why Canada has poverty. So.
I think that's a great point that you make, and we sometimes we like as Canadians maybe to see ourselves as the good guys in the globe, and yet we can turn a blind eye to the beggar at our gate.
Right. Well, and I think we just don't realize the burden that having poverty in our country causes. I believe it was something like $32 to $38 billion last year was spent on issues of poverty. Yeah. And that's not even quantifying in the damage that the people not paying into CPP, the people, the lost income that's been not got, the smaller marketplace because of the lack of cash flow being put into the economy by people working and engaged in their, we're the second largest country landmass in the world, and we have a very small population. So it's never made sense to me as how we are going to be sustainable. We're a young country, so we can't say, well, we got it we've been around for 150 years, right?
Right.
So I don't know how it's sustainable to have this many people in your population disengaged. So, from from even if you're just totally selfish and don't care about your brother, it still makes better sense to deal with this issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is what it is. And I realized early in the game that, you can fill stadiums with people that are smarter than me. So I
Right.
wasn't going to be the guy that's going to create the systemic change that's going to solve poverty in this country. But I can probably change my side of the street. So Feeding Windsor kind of comes out of that mentality, is that, we're just trying to change our side of the street.
Right. So let's talk about Feeding Windsor, and there's several aspects or programs under the banner, and the first one I want to talk about is community meals.
Okay.
So local churches, New Song Church, Throne of Grace, Ambassador Baptist, 3 churches that are holding community meals. What's a community meal? What's the purpose of it?
Well, community meal, all Feeding Windsor's programs is designed on dealing with issues of food insecurity and social isolation. Those are kind of a common thread in everything that we do. And with the community meals, one thing at the mission, what would happen is everyone goes to the downtown mission, and they would have 200 people, 225 people would sit and have a meal at noon hour. So usually there was very few children there because kids would be at school. So I wanted to do something in the evening. I wanted to be able to, a single mom or the working poor or senior couldn't come down and have supper. They're free meals. The churches provide hospitality and a location. We serve the people in their neighborhood, and that's what we want to do, is we want them to go to the church. And what happens is the teachers from the school come over and serve one night. The firefighters from the fire hall down the road come in and serve another night. The people in the local business or the hospital come over and serve another night. And it connects people to who they see at the variety store, at the grocery store, on the street.
Yeah.
And what we know about people is when you know each other, you tend to treat people better than you do strangers. And the other thing we know is that we automatically look for how we're different. When we spend time together, and breaking bread is a great way to spend time together, we find how we're common.
That's right.
And through the community meals, that's that the trust is built, the friendships are built, the talks can happen at the table, and they're just a great part of building community in those neighborhoods that we're in. The other thing is for the church is to put it on. It's not about the walk of the people that come in the door. It's the walk of the people that are already there, and it's for the church congregation to practice their faith of loving their neighbor, of feeding the poor, helping the elderly, and this is their time. This is no more sparring. This is time to walk away from the heavy bag, and now it's time to fight. And that's what we want to see. It's not about, and people say, often about, I don't see the work that I do as being as charitable as a lot of other people give me credit for, because I see it as quite selfish. It's about my walk. It's Feeding Windsor is reflective of who I want to be in the community. It's about my growth. I don't own the person that comes in the door. I only own my side of it.
Right.
So that's what I expect from the churches too, is this is time to practice your side of it.
Then we have another aspect, lunch clubs, and what's a lunch club, and where are they located?
Lunch clubs are kind of a food empowerment kind of thing, or food participation kind of thing. It's for people make a conscious decision to have a cell phone. You make a conscious decision to have cable TV, and you need to make a conscious decision to invest in your own food security. You can be wherever you are in life. That's nothing wrong with that, but you need to be a participant. You just can't let life happen to you. In whatever way you can, you need to be able to participate. So this gives people the chance to take part in a lunch club. They're done in mostly CHC buildings, which is community housing buildings. We're at 920 Olette, 2455 Rivard, 1081 Campbell, the cottages on Campbell. And we also have a neighborhood one here at New Song Church. And people pay $25 a month. They get lunch Monday to Friday, 4 days. So they get 20 lunches, sometimes 21 lunches for $25. And a lunch, means that, it may be soup, salad, sandwich, dessert, coffee, and tea. It costs you about $1.80, $1.90 for a medium coffee now at McDonald's. So, it gives people a higher quality of food. It brings people out, and they come in, we're open from 11:30 to 1 o'clock, so they can come and visit with their neighbors. It helps people to move around their building a little bit and take a little more ownership in their building.
It puts power in the hands of the people to make their decision about how to be frugal and wise with the little resource that they have.
Right.
Yeah. The emergency housing diner and the social enterprise that's running out of that. Tell us that story.
Well, we're, as a diner, just, breakfast and lunch kind of menu. And the idea was we had the opportunity to partner with the city emergency shelter plan and provide meals for anywhere from 60 to 90 families, so from 180 to 270 meals a day for people that are homeless in the community, families that are homeless primarily in the community. So we took that on and fulfilled that agreement with the city, but we've taken the other part of the restaurant and opened it up as a diner to the public. So you can come in after church, you can come in, we're open from 7 o'clock in the morning till 2:30, 8 till 2:30 on the weekends. It's on Howard, a very busy street. People can come in, get a great lunch, a Reuben sandwich, a burger and fries, or, simple diner food.
Yeah.
But all the proceeds, it's a social enterprise, all the proceeds that comes in through the doors goes right back into the community.
And the diner is attached to a motel that the city contracts with to provide emergency housing.
That's right.
The food club store, what's that?
The food club is kind of what a food bank isn't. Food banks commonly get all the same items. If you go to any food bank, if one has Kellogg's and soup, the other ones have Kellogg's and soups. And what they might not have is school lunches, or they might not have, they wouldn't have cheese, for example, probably, or meats, or frozen products. They might not have any perishable goods, maybe produce or something, but not anything other than what everybody has. So we ran like a small market that has the things you won't find in the food bank. So we might have frozen meat, we have cheeses, lunch meat, bacon, pierogies, frozen dinners, vegetables, and what it's designed to do is you pay $25 for a membership, you immediately get 50 trade dollars to shop in the store. Our prices are based on the low end, like it would be like a no frills or a food basics kind of pricing. So bacon might be $5, but you're only $2.50 deep. So even from the best price, you're already saving. And two things happen when people are on short food budget. They tend to go to the convenience store in their area, buy $5, $10 worth of groceries at the time, pay a premium price instead of a sale price, so they already knock down their buying power. And this way, it just reverses that. And people get an immediate benefit for making a decision. In North America, we're all trained to, expect immediate rewards for our efforts. So, by people doing something and immediately seeing the benefit of it, it encourages them to make those kind of choices more often.
The pet food bank, what in the world is that?
Well, that is just that, pet food bank. And people would say, well, why are we in that? Well, it's an extension of our isolation, program, trying to get people not to be so socially isolated. Your pet, if you're a senior, if you're a young child, if you have mental health issues, can be such a comfort, such a tool for your peace of mind and for your calm. And often people are faced with, I heard so many times, I went to the food bank and I cook up the macaroni and I throw the vegetable soup over it and I feed it to my dog. And when I was at the mission, people in the sanctuary program, I would see them stay outside and sleep with their dog because they couldn't bring the dog in the mission. So my fiance Janine always had a passion for animals and wanted to do a pet food bank, and we got a generous donation from a donor to open one, and in her honor. And they oddly enough, I thought, well, you know what, if we get 20 people a day, or 20 people a week, that's going to be amazing. We supply food for about 300 animals a month.
Wow.
Yeah, and more tears are shed in that room than probably any other program we do.
So, from all of these activities that you describe, it would be easy to have, a budget that would require millions of dollars to be able to do all of this kind of work.
Yeah.
But there's something very special and unique about our relationship with Feeding Windsor being an outreach of New Song Church.
Right.
There's a certain kind of synergy. There's a certain kind of infrastructure provision, things like that. Talk to me about some of the things that you're discovering about the synergies that happen when social work and church work intertwine.
Right. Well, and I realized over my time, not every church is the same. Every church, the congregation sets, I guess, the vision of that church, and some are learning churches. Where the lesson of the Bible and the word of the Bible is what's important to learn. And then there's churches that are pastoring churches that are happy to be the hands and feet of God and Lord, and do the work that way. And worship happens in both churches. Worship's worship. But how they honor those words can be different. Right. So our partners tend to be pastoring churches, churches that want to do church outside the walls, want to reach out to the community, to the neighborhood. And those are where we thrive, and I think that's where the church thrives of us. There's infrastructure out there, unused infrastructure in many cases, for probably 100 hours, 168 hours that the week brings. Yeah. So I always thought that I don't want donor dollars going to building infrastructure when there's an abundance of infrastructure empty. So that was one of the reasons why to reach out to the church. Let's turn the lights on in this place and, let's do church. Yeah. So we don't spend a lot of money on infrastructure. The church gets the opportunity to reach out to its neighbors and to love and help people and talk to people. The churches that we are in realize that it's not their mission field. That's not what it's about. It's about the church itself practicing and loving, and those are the ones that thrive, and those are the ones that are able to make amazing things. Like we do in the, as you know, in 920 Olette, we have about 30 people that come down every day and have lunch. We've put a sign up saying, hey, does anyone want to do an alpha? And we get 30, 35 people sign up for an alpha course. Yeah. And in most alpha courses, you'd have 35 people sign up and 17 graduate. We have 30 people graduate. Right. And then they say, well, what can we do next? Well, we'll do a Bible study on Thursday night. 30 people sign up for the Bible study. Yeah. Those are the things that come out of it because of the way we approach people learning about faith.
I like the way you described it as pastoring churches. Most people think of a pastor as the person that the church hires to take care of the parishioners, and it's kind of a closed set. You're our chaplain, you're our shepherd, and you just take care of us.
Yeah, you're going to marry us and bury us.
Right. but what you're describing is a church that pastors its community. And what a powerful idea that that the church can practice pastoral care. Yeah, every church will have a pastor or pastors from a ordination professional perspective,
Right.
but really what we're talking about here is the people of God, everyone picking up their part of that vision
Right.
and being in the community and making a difference.
I just want to
Yeah.
just remember, the last sermon at St. Andrews when we started there, and Reverend Ron said to me, he said, "Roger, will you make sure you come to the service?" I said, "Sure. It's last service. I'm going to go." Um, and so he spoke very highly of Feeding Windsor, but his sermon was on breaking camp.
Mm-hmm.
And it was when God spoke to Moses and said, "You've been very comfortable here for a long time, but it's time to get up and move."
Get up and move, yeah.
And people thought, and everyone thought that was a message to the congregation, because they all were going to either join another church, or they were going to go to the church that was merging, or it was going to be time to move. You've had it good here for 125 years, but now it's time to move.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, it found out later, it was for Feeding Windsor, because we moved and thrived. Because the move, I was there, I went there, and I just started doing a meal. I was doing 3 meals, and the first year we fed 12,000 meals on a $12,000 budget, and I was pretty happy with this. Well, then we moved. We went shortly to the AIDS Committee kitchen, and then over to here, and that's when we thrived. We doubled, and we doubled the next year, and we doubled the next year, because we moved. We didn't get comfortable. We said, "Okay, we're doing this. What can we do next?"
Yeah.
And
I don't think we've hit the ceiling yet, Roger.
No, I don't think so.
What do you think that? I mean, it's always easy for us to, if you're in the world, to have an opinion of what the church is, and if you're in the church, to have an opinion of what the world is.
Right.
Where do you think that we get it wrong? Where does the church get it wrong in its view of the world, from your perspective?
Faith isn't the answer for all things. Faith alone, without action, is not the answer to all things.
Yeah.
And I think there's a disparity there. I have a needle in my arm. I'm in an alley. I can't pray this away. You know what I mean? And it causes a separation, because then a lot of people that are offside just see the church as a place of judgment.
Right.
I don't need you to tell me I'm offside. I already know I'm offside.
Right.
So when I come, it just becomes a burden on me, right? So I see that. That's a feedback you get. And a lot of people see the church of old,
Right.
where people feared God,
Yeah.
and everything was, black and white.
Yeah.
So it's a two-way street. The church that you went to with your mom or your grandparents isn't necessarily the church of today. The church out of necessity has changed too. Otherwise they'd be empty.
Right.
So they've changed, and they see their role, in the work that they do in a community, more than just the Word of God.
Yeah.
So there's a real learning curve, I think, from both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
I've seen a lot of amazing things done from in my time in the churches with people on the outside.
Yeah.
And I've seen some huge growth, but you can't underestimate. We're all animals. We're spirit and we're animal, right? And the mind is hard programmed into certain reactions and certain things. Like I always say, if you think you're going to win somebody over to Christ at a meal, you're just naive, because we're hardwired. Not your relationship with your faith is going to be the most intimate relationship you have in your life, and you're hardwired not to make those kind of decisions when you're in crisis.
Yeah.
So if you see someone in crisis and you think you're going to win them over, you're really making a fool of yourself.
Yeah. I think as the church, we have a message. It's given to us to share. But we also have to remember that Jesus said, when he gave the message, he said, for him who has ears to hear, let him hear.
Yeah.
In other words, not everybody can hear it.
Yeah.
They're not at a place or where they're ready to hear it.
Right.
You know, but that the beautiful thing about love is love essentially says, well, I don't care if you're listening or not. I love you.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm here to invest in your life in some way. I'm here to demonstrate that I love you.
Yeah.
And so loving your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
And with the demographic, the marginalized, the stigmatized people that we deal with in a long time, you know, they don't love themselves.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're suspicious of that, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes. And, you know, well, that's all you can do is just keep doing what you're doing. Hopefully someday that person says, you know what, I want a piece of that peace that person has.
Yeah.
I'm ready today. And, you know, you got to if you're there consistently, you'll be there at that time when someone's sick of being sick and tired of being tired, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. A ministry of being present in people's lives in a meaningful way and in a humble way. Mm-hmm. You know, there's nothing arrogant and proud about you know, frying up some eggs for somebody.
No.
But what an opportunity when we discover it's not us and them, it's just us.
Yeah, and we people need to know they matter. Mm-hmm. You know, and that they're important enough for you to do this today for me, even though I don't know you, and you know, you know, I can't do anything for you.
Yeah.
You know, and that's it. I mean, that's why I say when people spend time together, they find their hopes and their dreams and what they want is very similar.
Yeah.
You know, I used to, you know, see at the mission sometimes we'd roll up the doors to serve the meal and people would just stand there in this community and just break down and cry because they had no idea that there's going to be 250 people or 225 people sitting out there.
Right.
Then they'd say, oh, that guy I went to school with, he had a full ride scholarship. You know, oh, that guy there, you know what I mean? And now all of a sudden, all the statistics that you hear, you know, the 1 out of 7, you know, people live in poverty, 2 out of 3 kids in the West End live in poverty. All those statistics now have a face.
Yeah.
You know, and that changes things.
One of the programs that you ran prior to our working together that you've talked about reinstating is the Culinary training program.
Yeah.
And that was something that you did back when you were at the mission.
Yeah.
And so talk about that program.
As we blow out the walls here of the kitchen, we plan on making about 4 or 5 workstations so we can start doing the culinary training program. And 2 things, that's going to give us the hands to help make the volume of food we need as we expand.
What is the volume right now?
Oh, we serve almost 100,000 meals a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's volume.
4 years ago, it was 12,000 meals. And that's not even counting the meals at the diner. That's the meals that we basically, you know, giveaway meals.
Yeah.
And, you know, we do another 80,000 meals at the diner.
Feedingwindsor.ca. Hit the donate button, please. Thank you.
The culinary training program actually is thank God to my fiance because she volunteered at the downtown mission at the time. And one day I said to her, I says, you know, I think I'm going to quit. I had been there for maybe 3-4 months, and I says, I just can't come in here and make meals and come back the next day and make meals for the same people again and come back that's not going to be my career, you know. And she says, well, you can either walk out the door, which I'm sure lots of people do, or you can do something that's going to change it. So we came up with the culinary training program, and while we're making those meals, we can provide people with barriers to employment, entry-level skills to get into the commercial kitchen. And over the 2 years that I was there, we put 104 people through the program, and over 50% of them went to work.
Wow.
And about, I think 8 or 9 of them were lifers.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Lifers, they had life sentences. They were coming out through the halfway house, through parole.
That's
back
right.
into the community.
Yeah. No, so now you got not only a big barrier to employment, you got a 20-year gap in your employment history.
Yeah.
So, but... And I'll tell you, that's something that I was really conflicted with because, you know, I have my own opinions about what's the right penalty for someone who takes someone's life, right? But, if you're living in a society that says this is the penalty for this crime, and someone actually goes serves that penalty, your beef is not with that person. Your beef is with your MP or the judge, not me. If your society says this is the rules and someone plays by the rules, then you got to let them come back into the society and have hopes and have dreams and be a neighbor and a father and love and be loved, right? So we actually really tried to get the people, from St. Leonard's House and places like that where they could take part, and we were very successful in those roles.
50% of the graduates entered and stayed in the workforce.
104 people we put through, about 97% graduated, and 50% of the whole thing went to work.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, we even got a couple of scholarships from St. Clair College for a couple of the...
For the food program there.
Yeah, for people that were doing the food.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, Roger, if you had 10 times the people, 10 times the resource to work with, 10 times the opportunity, what would that look like? And I mean, besides you going to an early grave because if you had
37 locations.
If you had 10 times the assistants, so you didn't have to do it all yourself, what would a 10 times vision look like?
Well, last year we used 15,000 volunteer hours. So just imagine 150,000 volunteer hours.
We could do
you
damage.
know what I would be into every low income area. And we are across, we're now about 10 different locations across a corridor in the city where the highest density of poverty exists. Windsor is kind of unique and it has a problem that very few cities have, and that's their services for people who live in poverty and everything, and the housing for people who live in poverty. The vast majority of it is in a corridor from the river up, 10 blocks and across the whole city from Lausanne Road to the other side of, Brock.
Yeah.
So our services, in fact, just recently in the map, we put in the office, we put a map up and started putting all these pins in because I wanted to see where we service and where we don't service. And then I stood there and I realized that right across that banner, we've got about 10 locations, and many of them have multi-programs running in those locations. I think it's terrible that a senior in this country can go to work at maybe a non-union job and raise his family and be a good neighbor and walk the dog with his wife after supper and then retire into poverty. So I mean, every senior home would have not an issue with food security. Low-income housing wouldn't have an issue of, food security. Children wouldn't go to school hungry in this country like they do. And more importantly than anything, we deliver services at very low barrier, right where you are. If you say you're low income, okay, you're low income. If you tricked me, oh well. And we provide services because we want people to have, you said something when I sent you photos about the Christmas party we did at the diner. My staff put on totally just asked me, can we use the room? They arranged the Santa Claus, they arranged music, they had a different pizza company bring pizzas in, and the kids had a great time, 3 hours, they all got gifts, they all ate as much as they could, they were laughing and dancing around, and when I sent you the photos, you said those children don't even realize they're homeless.
Yeah.
And I think that's what should happen. I don't think kids should realize they're different.
Right.
So that's probably what I would do with.
Roger, I thank God for you and for the very special way that He's been using you in your life. And I think that what He's doing in your life is very replicable. People of vision, the community, the church, there's so much that can be done, and you don't need giant infrastructures to do it. You need a willingness to go and do something.
Yeah, no, really. All the amazing things that can get done or have been done in the world have been done by very average people.
Yeah. So people can find you on Facebook and at feedingwindsor.ca.
Yeah, yeah.
And
mostly here.
and yeah, you can always find here at New Song Church. That's
Yeah,
right.
So
Yeah. Roger, thank you so much for sharing your heart, and it means a lot, and I'm glad that your story is getting told. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Cameron. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, my interview with Roger Fordham of Feeding Windsor. You can learn more about that ministry at feedingwindsor.ca. So I wonder, what can be accomplished by average people willing to meet a need? Who else in Canada might be working in sales or running a blues bar and heading toward a life of hospitality in Jesus' name? If you enjoyed Sidewalk Skyline and you want to hear more of what's happening in Canadian cities, subscribe to Sidewalk Skyline on iTunes, Spotify, and our YouTube channel. Did you know that some people prefer to watch podcasts online while others prefer to listen when they're driving, walking, or working out at the gym? Well, whatever your preferred platform, why don't you go there now and subscribe to Sidewalk Skyline. If you like what you hear, leave us a rating, share any insights, questions, or helpful comments. We're going to talk to people from coast to coast about all things urban. Our next podcast will be a session with Daryl Dash, a church planter in Toronto's Liberty Village. How can a church get established in a neighborhood made up exclusively of high-rise condominiums? That's a question that many people are asking. Where do you start to gain access to people that live such private, individualized lives? Subscribe now so you won't miss the next drop of Sidewalk Skyline. Like us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and anywhere else you might find us. Thanks for listening. Keep one ear to the sky and one ear to the ground. I'm Kevin Rogers, and this is Sidewalk Skyline.